Hello, my name is John, and I am one of the co-founders of the World Economic Federation. Today, I will be discussing the physics that inspired the climate change solution that this channel's community will be able to shape. There are a lot of potential solutions that will be discussed on this channel, but today I'm going to share the interpretation of physics that I am working on and how I intend to get its tests with predicted outcomes accomplished as our submission to Kurt Chimongel's Theory of Everything contest. I don't know if this is right, but it just fits nicely with the evidence, and thanks to Kurt, I have a pretty fun way to share this with others who, like me, professional or not, like to spend their free time on physics. So, let's get to the fun part. To understand the nature of the universe, you must understand the nature of dark matter and dark energy. To do that, you have to start with the fundamental forces. For those of you who don't remember how they are taught, they are gravity, electromagnetism, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force. While they don't say where it is or how it works, mainstream physics also states that time is in a fourth dimension, a hand wave of unobtainium. If a fourth dimension makes no sense to you, I agree. I am told that if you're doing physics on paper, it helps if you push it off somewhere where you don't have to think about it. Extra dimensions, dark matter, and dark energy, as far as I can tell, are just physicists speak for, I don't have a clue, but I have to make tenure. Or as they put it more diplomatically, shut up and calculate. This rather unquestioning scientific culture fits together easily with corporate interests, who are far less interested in challenging science with no guaranteed economic reward, even if successful. When physics is happy to keep quiet and not disturb a corporate narrative, we come to the nadir of scientific discovery. At a certain point, science becomes so divorced from research, reason, and life, it falls to stagnation. Closed-mindedness in the world of physics is best described by the declaration of Max Born and Werner Heisenberg at the 1927 Solvay Conference that stated, "We consider quantum mechanics to be a closed theory whose fundamental physical and mathematical assumptions are no longer susceptible of any modification." For nearly 100 years, physics has, on the whole, stayed loyal to the quantum mechanics model enshrined by Niels Bohr and Heisenberg as the Copenhagen interpretation, and not even Einstein's disagreement with it, correctly argued or not, or subsequent objections, have dethroned Copenhagen. The reason you have to start with the fundamental forces, at least by our theory, is that the fundamental forces are 75% wrong thanks to the closure of thought in physics. To correct what I believe the error to be, you must remove gravity, the weak force, and the strong force, because none of them exist as described. I will account for them, they just don't work the way they are taught. Let's start with getting rid of the weak and strong force. Part 1. The fundamental forces. Leaving the positive and negative charges of the electromagnetic force on the table, now you should add to it heat and dark matter. Dark matter is the stabilized form of kinetic energy. Heat is an excess amount of dark matter in a given space under the given pressure. If you have an area that can hold more dark matter, you will feel that it is increasing levels of cold, as stable kinetics are just that, cool. The kinetic repulsion of magnets is just two poles of kinetic energy at a low capacity repelling each other by being at a compatible frequency to push off of each other. Just like solid mass pushes back against the dark matter in your atoms more firmly. Since the dark matter that holds your atoms into form is so densely packed to create matter, you can easily push your hand through that kinetic field unobstructed, as kinetic dominance in magnets is very different in frequency than the densely packed kinetic fields that stabilize that matter. If you have ever been around an exposed demonstration of superconductor, you will notice that it is aggressively cold. That is not just the liquid nitrogen. If you are close enough, the magnetic field is actively and more aggressively removing the heat from you through its field, accelerating how quickly the demonstrator has to add liquid nitrogen. The shell of atoms are composed of dark matter as well, as what is sometimes called the Higgs field. In other contexts, the mechanics of kinetics has led to the crisis in cosmology. There are other indicators for the nature of dark matter. I would like to draw your attention to the field of string theory. As seriously as string theory is taken by some, the leading criticism of string theory is that it has not had a single bit of predicted or experimental evidence. Part of this is because how on earth do you run an experiment for a bunch of dimensions we cannot imagine or know how to access? This is why, as much as physicists in string theory say they are the most likely candidate for the theory of everything, or grand unified theory, the outside physics community has largely moved on to increasingly complicated interpretations. It is my belief that the strings in string theory are in fact the substance of dark matter and the theorized Higgs field itself. Aside from the portion of physics which aligns with relativity, string theory is the physics of timeless dark matter and energy. It is not in fact gravity that causes lensing. It is dark matter, because gravity does not exist. Elements that are what I refer to as kinetic dominant are the light gases making them go up, like hydrogen and helium, because, much like an unshaken bottle of salad dressing, elements in the universe are pushed together by the Higgs field in order to organize according to density, only in three-dimensional space, not unlike the vertical effect at smaller scale. You can see it in the layers of the planets and atmospheres. I suspect the only reason we think gravity is a thing is because we are made of denser materials that sink into the kinetic field and pool together in kinetics well, leaving us on the planet's surface. It is not gravity that pulls the universe together. It is the universe that organizes by density, by forcing us together according to that density. That is why gravity is too weak to explain aspects of the early universe. It's not the pulling of gravity, but compression pressures settling and pressing and increasing over time that dominates and forms the universe. This is why I refer to this interpretation as the simple string interpretation, as we are beginning the process of reworking string theory without trying to make gravity and time emerge from deeper dimensions, recognizing the dimensions as frequencies and aspects of kinetics in our space down to the Planck length, but free of entanglement. They exist out of time down to the compressed membrane between universes rather than dimensions in a multiverse. Where things really went haywire for string theory, beyond adding that extra dimension for time due to Minkowski, is thinking gravity needs to be a particle rather than an emergent result of other mechanics. Due to this insistence on gravity being a particle, when they found the spin 2 gluon in 1974 that did not fit their interpretation of gravity, rather than question their interpretation, they abandoned string theory altogether and created superstring theory, by, you guessed it, adding a bunch more dimensions until things kind of fit again. Sorta. When I was researching, I came across a great video by Spacetime describing these events, so I will link it here, and if we are right, early string theory was good physics led astray by bad math and interpretations. This interpretation has the potential to explain a lot of the anomalies in known physics while recontextualizing historical experimental results. If you look at the history of development in physics since that time in the 70s, you will see what I consider a stagnation of progress. I believe this is the likely cause. If you would like to know what the universe is made of, it is possibly a superfluid field of kinetic energy expanding out as fusion produces more kinetic energy from the stars that pours from the filled galaxy wells, causing expansion of the universe. While kinetic energy favors settling outside the density dynamics of galaxies pooling as they are full for their mass and densities, so kinetic energy stays in its heat state to continue its journey with minimal loss driving expansion. Dark matter is also the additional mass that collects from motion. Basically, we harvest energy from our planet and eat that fuel, which becomes heat. Then heat rises out of the planet and returns to the solar winds to expand the universe, riding the elemental gas. Since the gluons of the kinetic Higgs string field as dark matter against atoms cause kinetic suppression effects, this makes the entropy rate of the atoms that they entangle with to slow their perception of local time down at the atomic level. through slowed entropy, not in some other dimension, but right here, right now, as you move through the universe. If you look on YouTube, you can even find a video of a guy exploiting the conversion of dark energy to heat in incremental doses to cook a chicken by slapping it in the single greatest bit of dark matter research to date. The dark matter suppression of time is a mechanic that will be exploited in the first experiment. This theory could explain multiple unexplained phenomena in physics. Here are just a few possibilities. The reason the sun is hotter further from the surface rather than right at the surface is because the density and kinetic energy of the sun create a transitional pocket of compression against the outward kinetic pressure, reducing the heat from being fully released due to those pressures, causing the conversion to heat well away from the surface, not at the surface as non-kinetic spaced physics expect. This creates a no man's land between the compression of the universe and the primary mass of the sun, and the outward pressure created by that fusion. Radioactive elements are elements that have inadequate kinetics to stabilize their electrons, causing them to decay, releasing radioactivity and heat as kinetics dissipate from their weaker entanglement. Electron spin may be a result of its relationship to the kinetic shell of that atom and the context of the kinetics in its creation. The proton mass ratio, 1836.1526, may have something to do with the minimum amount of kinetics to stabilize the atom in an electromagnetic context. Beta decay is when a neutron converts to a proton, which happens when there is only enough kinetics to temporarily neutralize a proton into a neutron. Once the kinetics and light electron are lost, the kinetic suppression is lifted, reverting the neutron back to a proton. Accelerated charges radiate by lightly entangling the kinetic fluid of their kinetic frequency in the substance of the universe, riding on the kinetic wave at their frequency to their ultimate destination of full entanglement and integration into their time context. Is light a wave or a particle? It is a wave when out of time context riding the kinetic field. It is a particle when fully entangled to a resistance medium to give context in the universe at a place and time. The reason the outside arms of a galaxy go faster is not because of kinetic energy in this case, but rather the lack of dark matter. Being further from the central singularity of the well, the outside moves faster in time, creating an optical illusion of kinetic speed when it is in fact the absence of it that causes the appearance of speed through acceleration of time itself. This also can be applied to galaxies that are accelerating away as they continue to burn off mass. As that mass leaves the galaxy, the way it moves through time will continue to accelerate. I do not know the work of physicist Eric Weinstein very well. I was, until recently, unfamiliar with his work, but I have been told that my description of kinetic entanglement process is not dissimilar to his work in geometric unity. My physics partner introduced me to his work as I was discussing the entanglement of strings to matter with him, as he felt that Dr. Weinstein resonated with my theory if you discount the extra dimensions, etc. When you don't have a degree, it's always nice to hear that people with degrees, whom you've never heard of as an amateur, are also digging in the same soil, be it Weinstein or Tamanaka. To put it simply, dark energy is not so much energy as it is the absence of dark matter, making time flow faster in that local area, giving the appearance of speed relative to our perception of time, making the perceived acceleration, or speed, an artifact of relativity. Another term that may apply to kinetics is virtual particles. These are the particles that blink in and out of existence that are part of the universe on paper. I suspect by some brilliance on their part, I will never understand, that physicists just knew they had to be there. They would seem to pop in and out of existence on paper in a sense as they perform their role, moving from various frequencies of dark matter and heat to entangling with mass that it moves through at the right pressure frequency. Their ability to change direction without mass fits unentangled kinetic superfluid properties as they follow pressure waves in mass interactions. If this is the nature of the fundamental forces, there is a reason for the hole where gravity should be in physics. Whether they wanted to listen or not, physics was telling them to stop fixating on Newton, because while absolutely, undeniably brilliant, he was a man of his time, and he was only as good as his time and perspective allowed him to be. You don't see me inventing calculus here. My math skills are terrible. If I want to do math, I get a calculator. I am just putting together a puzzle of other people's work in a new interpretation that explains the unexplained and bolsters the work of others. I have been, over the course of years, listening intently to the work of physicists and attempting to include everything, the successes and the notable failures in particular, into a more complete account of the workings of the universe. The Standard Model is essentially a unlabeled resulting ratios of energetics and kinetics as far as I can tell. There is no need for fine-tuning when everything is limited by ratios, where energetics are dominant in unstable mixes and kinetics are strong enough for stable matter. No superpartners are needed to bridge it to string theory. The superpartner, you might say, is a hidden variable in the form of the kinetic strings themselves. I believe another part of the problem is that, while more classical math can roughly represent the nature of the universe, it has trouble with fluid dynamics, with all of its chaotic complexity lacking time, moving without friction, and again being fundamentally fluid in nature. That is why, in order to do certain tasks, you need a quantum computer, such as in fluid dynamics and quantum physics. This is because they are in fact the exact same thing. Math comes from a relativistic and rigid frame of reference within time and is a product of that frame of reference, without accounting for the transition from time to timeless, as well as from solid with mass to fluid without mass and inertia. As part of this more rigid frame of reference, classical mathematics are more comfortable with creating simplified physics, such as the act of renormalization that imposes time on the timeless. Math is not the nature of the universe, but a tool we need to understand it and know how to precisely manipulate it to our will. The distinction is subtle, but I believe that is a contributing factor as to why physics has stagnated, as rigid beliefs have prevented us from challenging things that are done to expedite mathematical ease. Math drives physics more than observations, much like putting in a temporary DIY fix that becomes permanent through being declared sacrosanct, even though it was a mathematical kludge in the first place. To put it simply, if all you have is a hammer, all that. This causes some mathematicians to decide there are just some questions you don't ask, or cannot know, as with the Copenhagen interpretation. There are no hidden variables possible, because we have deemed it so on faith. This has overlap with the writing of Dr. Sabine Hossenfelder in her book, Lost in Math, that I recently listened to and recommend. It is a good book if you would like to read a more authoritative account than I could ever produce. She apparently is also working on superfluid dark matter. Beyond that, I don't know her research well. I suspect I would need it explained to me slowly and with small words. If you would like to check it out, I will link it below. Within this interpretation, the double-slit experiment is explained by the fact that, below a Planck length, time does not exist. It is not observation that causes the collapse of the wave. It is the entanglement to measure it that forces it into time. The Copenhagen interpretation assumed time existed in a separate dimension that exists everywhere. My interpretation would be considered a hidden variable theory by the standards of the 1920s, due to dark matter not being an anomaly yet. As far as hidden variables go, the physicists who study it call it dark matter, which is physicist speak for we keep encountering what seems to be invisible mass we cannot account for. This seems to qualify as the very definition of a hidden variable. However, in contrast, I believe I understand the specific nature and qualities of that hidden variable after assembling a theory based on the unexplained in physics and extracting the pattern. It's not even that it was very hidden. It's just because the answer is frankly so boring. It's just kinetic energy and heat. If you want to detect dark matter, apparently all you need is a thermometer to measure it if it is out of balance for your local pressures, making an incredibly mundane interpretation, but easy to overlook, and not something that is going to show up in a multi-billion-dollar collider unless they are talking temperature regulation, or you get a good pop of excess mass. I suspect if you are only challenging the math, but not the interpretation, this can happen quite easily. Time being an emergent property means that below the Planck length, where time ceases to exist, all points intersect. Since both time and space are emergent, this means that you are never more than a Planck length away from everyone you have ever loved and lost, and even everyone in the universe, and every other universe is less than a Planck length from you as well, in a sense, as time and distance carries no meaning beyond that point. One may also posit that from that basis, the nature of the universe may indeed be deterministic. Not that you don't have free will, it's just that you have already made the decision as a quantum consciousness, and you have not experienced it yet, as your entanglement to your physical brain is what puts you here, now. I believe that those extra dimensions in string theory are closer to octaves in the kinetic field, and maybe even the membrane between the universe itself in M theory, which is compressed kinetic strings. There are traits in string theory that indicate a multiverse. I suspect it is built around something like the Penrose model. This theory states that the universe cycles between the Big Bang and the Big Crunch, but people have pushed back on this theory because there is no known force to bring the universe back together in the crunch. However, my interpretation does include a mechanism for expansion, fusion adding kinetic energy to expand the universe, and the contraction. If the universe works the way this interpretation dictates, when heat death occurs in the universe, the kinetic gluons do what gluons do in the cold. They stack on top of each other in the same point, the center of the universe. I believe that this action drags the universe back into a singularity of perfect matter, likely for the next Big Bang. I believe this is what we perceive as the order at the beginning of the universe in physics, as the dark matter would exist out of time and be very ordered. This goes deep enough into the kinetic field to create access to reach the infinite energy point beyond the kinetic membrane of hyperdensely packed strings in a process similar to fusion, but without classical fuel through quantum tunneling, as that energy is released in an immense burst, renewing the cycle of the universe. Due to the lack of time outside the Big Bang, we're still in the Big Bang in a sense. One could argue that the universe is neither 6,000 nor billions of years old from the context of any possible creator, so that may be a pointless debate. Time is how we order things. Every area has its own time frame in the universe, and every area has no time at all, equally. I will not go into what I suspect are the metaphysical implications of this theory, but it's a fun philosophical question. If you are interested in a video on it, let me know in the comments. The usual expression is, keep an open mind, but not so much, your brain falls out. But there is also a counterpoint to that argument about not having such a closed mind that your brains squelch out your ears. Besides, this stuff is fun, and brains need dessert too. Being that all mass is emergent based on the ratio and amount of entanglement between what I sometimes refer to as energetics, what puts the electro in electromagnetism, but electromagnetism is kinetics and energetics smashed together, so you lose sight of the missing fundamental properties. Kinetics, being stabilized, are dark matter, which becomes heat when there is excess kinetics for a given area's pressures. If something is kinetic dominant in properties, it floats like kinetics. If something has a higher energetic entangled ratio, making it kinetically dense, it sinks based on local resistance, which is another word for an imposing pressure. If it were not for Earth's crust, you would sink into the mantle, and you would get separated into your basic elements that are then reorganized based on their individual respective mass as physics dictate. Gravity is just buoyancy trying to kill you. Recently, black holes were found to be fuzzy. It is my suspicion that they are seeing a high-density bundle of kinetic strings that causes the time dilation that surrounds the black hole, which also causes a kinetic refraction. Right now, based on its description, what is known as the fine structure constant may have to do with the local kinetic ratio of an area. Think of it as an area's given chronological frequency, or time zone if you prefer. To check that, I would first look into possible correlation between dark matter and age in galaxies and their respective fine structure constants to detect the pattern in proximity to singularities, etc. I am still working, though, on the fine structure constant, but that's where I am on that one. The question of the location of missing antimatter is that, since the Big Bang consists of the blending of the fundamental forces of positive and negative energetics, dark matter and heat using pressure to collect and exert kinetic dominance, antimatter is not an equal natural byproduct. Antimatter in this model is likely supercharged matter in a sense, being a bit hyperactive in the shell, making it very timey-wimey. The reason it annihilates normal matter is because it splits atoms by colliding from a quantum standpoint at about the speed of light, well more than enough to split an atom. This also explains why antimatter violates symmetry. It violates our perception of time. The speed of light as we know it is the speed of transmission in that area of the kinetic field, but that varies according to local kinetic density, making the speed of light variable, as Einstein and others posited. Thinking on the star Stephenson 218, its unusually large mass may be the result of higher local kinetic density of the area, allowing for larger stars. The imposter supernova are a result of the sporadic collapse of the magnetosphere, unleashing a conversion to heat in giant bursts. In fact, I suspect this rare class of star and its traits slightly bolster the magnetosphere theory for the cause of the supernova energy burst. The act of renormalization in string theory and field theory, when appropriately done, is necessary for a very good reason. It works because much of string theory and all of field theory is math that takes place out of time. The act of renormalization is giving it a limiting chronological context for the sake of use as a probability. The broad range of differences between theory and measurement seems like it may have to do with the density or frequency of the kinetic field that scenario takes place in and the size of infinity being used. For non-physicists, I would explain infinity sizes as, take half of infinity and it's still infinity, but it's a different frequency of infinity. Sorry if that does not help, it's probably me, not you. Information loss is not managed by the need of a white hole. Black holes, along with everything else, will get collected up in the perfect matter at the time of the big crunch. This means that information is not likely destroyed, but simply hidden by high kinetic dominance neutralizing energy and distorting kinetic layers. Also, because time is emergent, no information can be destroyed, because every moment is always happening that has happened or will happen in this universe, as well as every other cycle of the universe. So destroying information is literally impossible. Full stop. So while there may be a white hole, it is not necessary to preserve information. Because the magnetic field around Earth is not even and is shifting to some degree, it is possible that the flyby anomaly can be related to the clumpiness of the kinetics in the magnetic field, which entangles to the satellite while moving at already high speeds, which may explain why you get an occasional value inconsistent with theory, because it messes with time a little for the satellite. I believe the explosion of a sun-going supernova is the release of the immense kinetic mass of the coronosphere at the collapse of an operational sun's magnetic field, which contains it, blasting outward from their point of origin as they are suddenly decompressing and flying outward as heat and radiation. High-temperature superconductivity is the result of electrons being able to travel through the kinetic medium of their environment free of obstruction. Magic angle graphene allows the electrons to move down the channels of kinetics created in between the bound electrons that have been stabilized through cooling. The highest temperature theoretical superconductors are elements which have a kinetic shell that exists well beyond the perceived surface, allowing electrons to pass through the kinetic field well clear of the energetics entangled at the center of the atom without cooling. Basically, you are using the atomic shell of dark matter to conduct the electrons freely. Dirac's large number hypothesis is likely also a result of kinetic physics due to its relationship to electromagnetism and misconceptions about the mechanics of gravity. The parallels Dirac observed make more sense when it's all aspects of electromagnetism at different scales. Electromagnetic turtles all the way down. I believe the difficulty in membrane theory may be the combination of the lack of time and a narrowing of the spatial context as it transitions to a state of no time or space. I suspect that if you learn to appropriately tune an antenna of high temperature superconductive material and a strong enough power source, you may be able to impact the membrane with waves for faster than light communication. This means any species with sufficiently advanced technology may switch from kinetic field light speed communication towards a membrane-based faster than light communication. Just like sound transmits faster in water because of water density versus air. Since waves and kinetics transmit faster across hyperdense areas of the membrane with sufficient power, SETI is looking for a shout in the heavens when any message is deep whisper against the dense border of the quantum universe. Black holes are giant kinetic dominant masses deep in the kinetic field. The reason it is black is because the atomic entropy of all mass is dominated by the inward forces of the surrounding kinetics that are so high that all but minimal entropy occurs and it absorbs all energy, not being kept overflowing by fusion as they do when they were suns. You can almost think of them as giant, stable atoms with superconductive shells. Gravity's perceived weakness from expectation is the detection of a slight kinetic lift from the passive yet weak entanglement of the kinetic waves leaving the planet, what physicists call gravity waves. Part 3. Experimental Design for Kinetic Theory. Now that we have covered some of the known unknowns that I believe these physics explain, let's move on. So far, we are only fitting interpretation to facts, whereas science is about experiments and predictions. Anyone can come up with a theory, but part of what makes this science is the part where one must base it on evidence and observation, and then make a prediction and an experiment in order to be viable. In my view, vanilla string theory may have had a lot of aspects right when it was discarded for not discovering the graviton that, as I said, does not exist, and instead discovered dark matter. Scientists did not know what to do with what they had found, being more focused on fitting the interpretation than discovery itself. The first experiment I would perform to bolster the theory consists of 2 atomic clocks starting out in sync, one control, one for the experiment. One clock has cesium alone as control, and the other has cesium gas in an accessible chamber that is to be filled with liquid hydrogen under great pressure. Hydrogen, being a kinetic dominant gas, can pack densely and through pressure entangle the cesium, slowing its entropy rate and slowing the clock through kinetic entanglement. This is the cheap and easy experiment that could be done. Prediction: tabletop time dilation when the kinetic properties slow the clock by a bit. Just as the pressures on your entropy slow time within a craft, the pressures of movement slow the entropy of the spacecraft and occupants as they transition into increasing kinetic frequencies with their uninterrupted wave of motion in open space. This can also probably be tested with computer modeling, of course. I cannot say how long it would take people to change from gravity to compression in any model. If they make this change, however, it should clean things up when accounting for the early stages of the universe, though. That's the prediction, anyhow. The most interesting experiment, I believe, would be to create a spacecraft that are essentially driven by dark matter, by manipulating its entanglement into a physical gas medium. These kinetic rockets, or impulse engines if you prefer, and I know I do, may have the ability to deliver sustained thrust in space at potentially rocket levels, drastically reducing travel times and improving fuel density between planets by running on electricity from any source. This technology could make space infinitely more accessible for everything from exploration to exploitation for mined resources, leaving Earth less impacted while gaining, eventually, easier access to large amounts of rare elements through space mining run on nuclear, hydrogen, and solar. From the outside, this propulsion system would appear reactionless, while being anything but. According to our theory, space is not a vacuum, but a false vacuum of kinetic substance. Combine this with the observed phenomena that low-temperature superconductors love to grab heat, and you are halfway there. Some of you may be familiar with the work taking place at Cal State Fullerton. I will include a link to a video on that work if you are not. That technology, as well as the controversial EM drive, both engage kinetics. The Fullerton drive is superior in my view by directing the kinetics to a device and then releasing them, whereas the EM drive barely does anything and would work even worse in space due to the lower kinetic density in the false vacuum as it expands the gluon field within the chamber. But neither is completely wrong. That said, I believe that if you create a tuned, high-powered microwave reaction chamber and essentially a rocket nozzle array to blast your helium, hydrogen, or other medium through, you will get thrust. However, rather than blasting your propellant into space never to be seen again, you blast it into a supercooled magnetic chamber that aggressively rips the heat off the acceleration medium into a strong magnetic condenser, where the pressure of the continued propulsion presses that condensation back into the system that returns it to the reaction chamber for reuse in another cycle. Essentially, this system uses supercooling to create a false vacuum, just like space is, allowing the reaction to occur without escaping the body of the vehicle. Visually reactionless from the outside, but not really. The better your cooling system, the faster you can go, but we can do better long term. Nice thing is that whatever energy is not consumed by the cooling system, the waste heat, can be reclaimed and converted back into energy, making it a bit of a space Prius. Prediction: kinetic thrust from a visually closed system. While it is not classically Newtonian, it does conform to Einstein's observation that a hot cup of coffee has more mass than the same cup of coffee cold. Heat up the medium, throw it backwards, then refreeze and collect it to return it to the chamber and throw it again, almost like a space tractor track. It's not so much violating Newton's first law, but more exploiting the fundamental forces of thermoelectrodynamics to manipulate mass, creating thrust with electricity through a loophole, eliminating most of the equal and opposite reaction with thermal management, all the way to Mars or a giant rock holding vast amounts of rare elements in the asteroid belt. This could lead to a true end in scarcity economics, at which point gold and other rare materials on Earth would be worth far less as they are being pulled from space, becoming cost-effective through electricity-driven space economics, not heavy rocket fuels. The main limitation is the material sciences being able to cool the gas stream in the magnetic collection chamber, but I bet there are plenty up to cracking that nut. If this happens, this could collapse the value of fiat currencies that depend on scarcity-based economics. This means the green energy credit system we will be covering in Part 2 would in fact be needed. The system is optimized with the hybridized structural strengths of Keynesian economics and monetarianism to create a proof-of-work system that overcomes the potential for stagflation. This means that not only would it fund this research, but we could also stabilize participating economies against scarcity-based volatility from a 21st century space program that serves humanity, not the military-industrial complex for the sake of itself. It does not matter if you believe in the climate crisis, as everyone still has a need for a stable and dependable currency, and if it supports their family when their job gets automated, that's a win as well. While some choose to debate climate change out of self-interest, it is generally understood that if your job can be automated cheaper, your days are numbered. But as I said, that solution is for the next video. Going back to propulsion, if you look at the gimbal video released by the Navy and authenticated by the DoD, The pilot's thermal imaging shows a cold field surrounding the craft. This is likely an artifact of the kind of propulsion that is described in the patent published by the Navy by Dr. Salvatore Pais. Pardon me if the pronunciation is wrong. The reason the space is cool surrounding the craft is because it is heavily compressed kinetic field creating that shell. And because their shell is compressing and directing the kinetic field in such a tight form, it maintains its cool, dark matter state. Therefore, it does not show as hot, as it is too stable in its manipulation to create the action. In essence, it is pure propulsion. This craft, much like a galaxy accelerating away above the speed of light, can do what it does because the speed of light is variable along with time, both being emergent properties from more fundamental variables that can change or be manipulated with the right insights. My suspicion is that the craft is using fusion and high-temperature superconductors. I doubt it is any of ours, since the fourth step in the experiment series after clocks, simulation, and impulse engine would be the creation of high-temperature superconductors. In order to create the high-temperature superconductors without a leg up, you likely need a relativistic supercollider. I doubt a specialized centrifugal supercollider would cut it. Eventually, with enough materials created to build a high-temperature superconductor-based supercollider and fusion power, you could essentially make a 3D printer that assembles what you are making from pure energy. To get to that point, what you likely need is a giant spaceship with a supercollider that is brought up to relativistic speeds, likely requiring the very impulse engine technology described above. This craft would be an enormous undertaking that involves a technology that I literally just described to you moments ago. And since the nations of the world still think that gravity exists, let's go out on a limb and say that the graft in the gimbal video is not likely one of ours, if this interpretation is correct. The prediction here is, once you have the super collider craft going fast enough, when you turn on your accelerator and have it make Moscovium, what you produce will be stable, durable, and high-temperature superconductive. I also suspect it will be likely cooled to the touch, light gold, and would likely be quite thermally conductive as well. The fifth and final step is the technology that the material would enable. From craft like the gimbal video to faster-than-light communication through membrane frequency transmission, compact fusion reactors, an assortment of what today is referred to as anti-gravity technologies in other applications and contexts. Considering the construction and time dilation involved, it will take a long time, but this climate organization hopefully will have the resources if we succeed. I don't know if this theory is right, but even if it isn't, let's hope it makes more than a dent in the climate crisis through the economics it inspired. Our goal for this channel is that with your participation, we can make this future a reality. Let me know what future topics you might like to hear about in the comments below, from how to balance the budget, eliminate taxation, fix healthcare, eliminate student debt, or how to make social media more safe for your family and privacy, to other topics not mentioned here. Thanks to everyone who is considering helping us work on this governance for our climate solution and scientific work, so we can ultimately fund our research, and we hope eventually develop a green space program if this interpretation is correct. If you would like to support this work, you can support us through our Patreon, or just like and subscribe. Thanks to Kurt Jamongel's Theory of Everything podcast for putting on a fun event. You will find his channel linked below, along with other referenced videos from other channels if you would like to know more about the physics discussed in this video. See you next time when we discuss a deeper dive on the climate crisis solution and how it will answer to its employees and users through a democratically administered trust system designed towards more equitable commerce between people and nations.